Terrence was big on the idea of the dissolution of boundaries, the boundaries getting dissolved down, and your mind exploding open and you experiencing life for what it actually is. Now, this sounds an awful lot like what I would understand as the left brain and the right brain. Yes, I've come back to my favorite topic once again. And I would understand this ego, this left brain, as this part of your mind that crafts an avatar. And this avatar blocks out all the other things in reality in favor of a mission, an identity, and a goal. So you put yourself sort of in a tunnel vision. You say to yourself, I am a monkey, or I am a high finance banker, or I am a boyo, or I am something. I individualize myself and create a craft in individuality. And then this has a sort of good and bad associated with it, a place that I'm going, a mission that I'm going on. And this is what we get caught up in as like our purpose and our goal and whatnot. Now, what's interesting is that, in a very, very basic study of the left brain, the right brain, you watch that video I did with Jill Bolte-Taylor, when the left brain turns off, it actually, when we go more into this right brain consciousness and we experience the consciousness of the right brain, we actually experience a much crazier world, a much wilder world, a world that is much more ineffable than we think, a world that is much more profound, because this idea of the mission and all this stuff, it all just dissolves and becomes meaningless. There's no boundary between me and my hand in the air. There's no boundary between me and the person there in the future. It's all just energy, man. You become like a yoga girl. You become actually quite inefficient. Now, this is very interesting because your mind is divided into these two types of perception, and weirdly, the right brain is the one more in touch with reality. It seems like reality is a lot closer to this flux, this boundaryless flux of like a quantum soup or a ever-living, dreaming fire that we all interact with. And perhaps when you take something like psychedelics and the world starts to flux and move like a dreaming fire, maybe you're actually seeing something that is closer to what the nature of the world actually is, which is weird. Now, Terrence talked about this briefly, so I'm going to play a little clip by him here that talks about that.
Since, I've made this example before, a child lying in a crib and a hummingbird comes into the room, and the child is ecstatic because this shimmering iridescence of movement and sound and attention, it's just wonderful. I mean, it is an instantaneous miracle when placed against the background of the dull wallpaper of the nursery and so forth. But then mother or nanny or someone comes in and says, "It's a bird, baby. Bird, bird." And this takes this linguistic piece of mosaic tile and places it over the miracle and glues it down with the epoxy of syntactical momentum. And from now on, the miracle is confined within the meaning of the word. And by the time a child is 4 or 5 or 6, no light shines through. They have tiled over every aspect of reality with a linguistic association that blunts it, limits it, and confines it within cultural expectation. But this doesn't mean that this world of signification is not outside, still existent, beyond the horizons, the foreshortened horizons of a culturally validated language.
Now, this is very interesting and very, very flattering for me, because this is Terrence ragging on jargon. He is saying jargon is a bad thing. Now, we can talk about this idea of us babies in heaven trying to drop into this matrix of ours. And maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe the flash is obviously a pretty big deal, but maybe it doesn't happen instantaneously. Maybe the sort of maybe as a kid we actually are a little bit more closer to heaven than we think. We're a little bit more in touch with the world than we think. But what happens is that over time, as our ego consolidates, we tile over our reality all this language. As he said, this hummingbird comes in, which is almost like a magic flux of experience that they witness in this. It's all its iridescent beauty, and then we slap bird on top of it that reduces it down to a category. The next time it floats in, we just pop bird out of our minds. We just throw the jargon at it. We no longer interact with it directly. We put up a wall between us and it. And maybe this is the beginning of the virtual reality headset that starts to slip over our eyes. And of course, the experience of someone who's an adult is that everything sort of goes dead after a while, and you only really care about the things that matter towards, getting your money and paying your taxes. That's really what you sort of slip into at some point. And then there's this terrible thing that needs to happen to you, the midlife crisis, where your jargon has to dissolve, your mission has to dissolve, your identity has to dissolve, and you have to actually reconnect with the world and have these shocking experiences of becoming a person again, becoming a child again, be opening your eyes to the nature of the world, learning to see again, learning to interact with the world again. Then you see that the world is way more living than you think. Now, this is profound in its consequences, because as Mircea Eliade, this is the gentleman sitting here, he would talk about the sacredness of the world in ancient religions that is sort of lacking from philosophical traditions like Greek philosophy and Christianity and all these type of things. For Iliad, the ancient idea was known as animism, and this is where you get this weird thing in ancient pagan religions where, like the trees talk and the rocks have a personality and the rivers have spirits and all this type of stuff. And this seems like a silly thing. But in fact, this looks a little bit like how the right brain might perceive the world. Of course, the left brain can't perceive faces. It's not very empathetic, whereas the right brain is. The right brain perceives personality in things. Perhaps the right brain perceives personality in everything. The right brain perceives personality not only in a rock, in a spirit, in a tree. It also perceives personality in concepts. For example, fortune, lovely concept, would have been known as fortuna, which is actually a woman. That is a girl. That used to be a god. Victory, a dead, empty, jargonized concept for us speaking the Anglo speak, was actually known as a goddess. She was a girl. Anger, for the Greeks, was Ares. These things, these conceptions, this language was alive. It was living. It was animated, because the world was animated. Because the thing in touch with reality that sees the world as actually animated. And it's a fallacy. Maybe it's a left-brained egotistical fallacy to see the world as inanimate. This idea that the world is a dead machine is actually precisely the virtual reality headset that us babies seem to have organized in heaven in order to keep us blind to what's going on. It's the little trick we seem to be playing on ourselves. Now, there's a very, very interesting problem, because when you take something like psychedelics, it dissolves this ego, it dissolves this identity, it dissolves this purpose, it dissolves this mission, because all these things are related. To have an identity is to have a purpose, is to have a mission. They're all related. All this stuff dissolves, and what happens is we reconnect with the beyond. We actually awaken to the nature of the world. We open our eyes for the first time, and we notice the significance of everything. We get hit by the blunt force of reality and what it actually is, and that is that everything is alive and vibrating. It's like everything is made up of a dreaming fire. Now, that's a very, very hard thing to understand, but again, you have to understand things from the concept of heaven, from eternity, from the babies, because when they look down at the matrix they're after making, the only sort of main factor for them is time. And if you understand E equals MC squared and like Einstein and all that stuff, you'd understand that all still frozen things like rocks and curtains and cars, these are those pieces of matter are actually just energy sitting still for an extremely long period of time. They're just very, very lazy bits of energy.